Hi everyone, Stepan here. I have just finished my round 1 game at the Dubrovnik Advent Open literally 5 minutes ago, and I have another game in an hour and a half. And since a bunch of guys are still playing, well, I decided to show you the game. First of all, there's one game missing in the playlist, my last league game, therefore the odd numbers, so I'll cover that game after this tournament. Okay, so anyway, I had no idea who I was going to play. The pairings got out, well, a minute before the game was about to start. So I'm facing a 1500 rated opponent. I played d4. She played d5 and I went knight f3. I wanted to keep things flexible. I didn't obviously know what she plays. So after knight f6 I went g3, and the pseudo-Catalan is something I've been enjoying recently. So I decided to go for that again. Bishop g4. Now, I don't necessarily want to go knight e5 straight away, but that's a pattern, so maybe later. Bishop g2, e6. This is all very standard stuff. As you can see here, there are still a bunch of games from this position. And in this position, she played a move I'd never seen before, knight c6. And I had my long think, my first long think. So obviously I should go c4. When your opponent doesn't have the option to go c6, then it's correct to blast open the center. But I was afraid that this was one of those weird lines where black is actually okay. If we transpose to a weird open Catalan with, I don't know, the knight on c6, that could resemble some normal lines. So my calculation was knight bd2, and after something like bishop e7, knight e5, or sorry, knight c4, and I pick up the pawn. But I wasn't sure. I should also say that I haven't used the engine for the game because I haven't finished my analysis, nor will I use it in the video. Unfortunately, you can check the game yourselves if you want to. I want to finish my analysis, but I had decided to show you the game anyway, even though I haven't done detailed analysis because, well, I've never shown games during a tournament. In any case, I didn't go c4, I went b3, which seemed interesting, playing for the e5 square. And my opponent played bishop e7. I think this bishop belongs on d6. I couldn't really understand bishop e7. That seemed like a very passive move. So, okay, bishop b2 castles, knight bd2. And I will play c4 at some point. I don't have to play it straight away. And this also guards the e4 square. She went rook e8. Not that e5 is ever happening because of the knight and the bishop and the d-pawn. So that's another move. I don't really know what rook e8 does. I'm gonna be honest, but okay. Rook c1. Again, I think I could have gone c4 instead of this, but I wanted to have the option to put pressure on c7 after c4. And here she played knight a5. I understand knight a5. It frees up the c-pawn, but it allows knight e5. And I think this is a very important tempo. Black, of course, shouldn't give up this bishop, so the bishop has to move. And the knight is stranded. So she played bishop f5. I think bishop h5 was also possible, and maybe even better because it pins my e-pawn. But okay, bishop f5 and now finally c4. And of course, if this is taken, my bishop comes to life, and I think black should be losing if this is taken. I wasn't sure what I was going to take with, but I think taking with the knight seems interesting. Although that allows her to trade. No, probably taking with the pawn. I don't know. Because if I take with the knight, then takes, rook takes, and c6, and all of a sudden I don't really have a way to break through unless I'm going to sacrifice. This is something I have been looking at during the game, and I remember thinking I'll figure it out if we get to that, but this doesn't seem good enough because the bishop is very strong. Let's say bishop h3, rook e1, something here. And if the queen ever comes to c6, I'm going to be in trouble. So I'm not sure white has enough here. So probably if c4 takes, I should take with the pawn to keep the knight bad. Probably. In any case, she went back to c6. And I was really happy to see this because now I get my type of position. I can take. And c5 is one of the variations I was looking at. It seemed very interesting. The reason I didn't like c5 is that white has a5, a4. Oh, sorry, black. And I wasn't sure if I had to go a3 here. So if I go a3 preventing a4, my knight is kind of stuck. Of course, black will never play e5. I should always be significantly better in this position, especially if something jumps into e4 and I get the c4 square for my pieces. But maybe I can just ignore this and go e3, and on a4 go b4. I don't know. So c5 was something I was looking at, but I was afraid of my habit to close the position down because I see a positional advantage. Of course, this is a big positional advantage. Let's say, let me put something on the board. I managed to get this. I think black should be losing here. So my goal after c5 ultimately was to go b4 and transfer the knight to a5, sort of Nimzo Indian style in reverse, where I can just put pressure on this pawn and then later on maybe prepare f3 e4 to just win the pawn. But instead I decided to just go rook e1 and play for e4. My opponent played rook b8, which pins the b pawn, but I have two pieces I can recapture with. And of course, if dc now, I take with the rook and the c pawn is hanging. And obviously e4 is a move, c5 is once again a move. I didn't want to go e4 because that leads to a bunch of trades. We get a position like this where I'm not even sure I'm that much better, because I don't really have a plan from here. I don't have a way to target the c-pawn. Maybe black has a timely c5 to just equalize, and it didn't seem like this was a big advantage at all. In fact, I wouldn't say it's an advantage. Maybe it is, but I wasn't sure. You can engine check this. So I played f3, and I want to recapture on e4 with the pawn. She played bishop g6, I played e4, and of course, if she doesn't take now, let's say random move, then, okay, this is a random move that gives the knight a square. Let's pretend the king is still on g8. Then the knight has to go to d7, and this just seems crushing. I think on e4, black has to take. Because if the knight, let's say random move again, if the knight goes to h5, then the knight is trapped. You're not moving your g-pawn. If you play bishop f5, I just win a piece. So this seemed to be game over. So on e4 takes. And here she surprised me with c5, and I had my second big thing in the game. There are two moves here, e5 or d5. e5 seemed incredibly strong to me. Incredibly strong. So if I go e5, knight d7, I don't go bishop c6, that does nothing. Instead I go d5. And in both variations, it's important to keep this pawn on c5 so that there's no counterplay against my king. Because I moved my f pawn, so you know. Oh, by the way, let me know how the Dink Gukesh game went. Yeah, actually don't spoil it. I haven't seen it. Never mind. At game, what was it, 9? So in any case, after d5, if takes, then look at these two pawns. Look at my pieces. My bishops are cutting across the board. The c pawn is loose. I'm threatening e6. This seems very good. But then I started looking at, well, what if black doesn't take? What if black doesn't take? Am I gonna take and go bishop h3? Surely there's a way to defend. So let's say bishop f8. I wasn't sure about this position at all. In any case, the second candidate move was d5. And here I had decided that black once again has to take. If not, then I'm going to transpose to the same position with e5, most likely. But ed5, and now I have two options. cd5 I knew was positionally better. It has to be great to have the option to push your e-pawn, but I couldn't see what to do if black simply attacks the pawn. The best I could see is knight c4, but don't I just lose the pawn? I couldn't see anything from here. Of course, I would like to take with the c-pawn, but I couldn't find a way to defend my pawn effectively. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. If I push e5, of course, then knight takes pawn, and there's always c6. So this, I think, is a bad mistake. I don't know. So I took with the e-pawn because I had calculated a variation that was winning for me. Now, I'm sure, and we actually went into something very similar I'm sure black had better options, and I'm going to show you a better option. But okay, let me show you the variation. Bishop d6. And now I went queen f3. And the point behind queen f3 is you don't have bishop h5. You have to do something else. And if you don't do anything, I'm just going to take on f6. I'm not sure whether the knight should move. If the knight goes to d7, I may even, so for example, knight d7, I may even have queen c3 ideas, where on bishop takes, I can just take. Maybe, I'm not sure. The problem is that knight f3 is always with check. So on queen f3, I really was expecting bishop h5, and I think it's a blunder. So of course, I can undermine the defense of the bishop with bishop takes f6. And of course, if black goes into the line with bishop takes queen, then mate is hanging on e8 after I take black's queen. So I was expecting queen takes f6. And now I have to take the queen, I think. If I take the bishop, the problem is queen d4 check, king h1, queen takes knight, and now my rook is hanging. And I don't think white's better here at all. I'm probably worse even. I don't know. I probably have to play rook e8, queen d1. And then maybe I even lose my b pawn. So I wouldn't be able to do that. I'd have to take the queen. And now I was hoping that this is a small advantage. Let's say bishop f3, bishop g6, I don't know, knight e4, bishop e5. Because I can never take on c5. There's bishop d4 check. And I wasn't sure whether white was better here, but I hoped that I could outplay my opponent here with a better pawn structure. Although now that I see bishop d4 on the next move, I don't think I can ever win any material. So yeah, maybe bishop h5 isn't a blunder if black recaptures with the queen. In any case, I took on f6. My opponent took on e1 first. I should show that if queen takes, bishop takes, you are now completely losing, because if bishop g2, this is mate, and if rook takes, then I just take the bishop. So she had to. I'm sorry if you can hear noises. It's from the room next to mine. So black inserted takes, and then took the queen. And unfortunately for black, this is absolutely busted. There are two interesting variations. So of course I take the queen. Once again, if black takes, then I'm up a piece, and that's it. So black has to take on g2. And now before I played queen f3, I was calculating rook e8 check, and I had assumed it was winning, but then I wasn't sure. And then I just played bishop c7 because I'm sure that's winning. So if rook e8, bishop f8 is forced, and I just take on g2. And of course I'm up a piece. I'm gonna have to give up my rook for the bishop. So let's say f6, knight e4, king f7, rook f8, king f8, bishop c7. Am I gonna queen my pawn? I don't know. It seems like it, but there could be a way to set up a blockade. Now that I see it on the board, I see no way to set up a blockade, but when I was trying to visualize this during the game, I wasn't sure. Now, of course, I can see that knight c5 unblocks on d7 and the bishop controls the other two squares, so black basically resigns. Instead of rook e8, I played bishop c7, which I'm sure is less winning than rook e8, but it's winning all the same. If black saves the bishop, I don't take on d6 because black cannot trade. I take on b8 and mate is hanging and the bishop is hanging, so it's over. If bishop f8, then rook e8 followed by bishop d6. So black has to take on c7. I take on g2, and this is it's just busted. The knight is so much stronger than the bishop because it has so many useful squares. I'm controlling the only open file. I'm up a protected passed pawn. I have a better king. So and black has a ruined pawn structure. Black's only source of counterplay is a5, a4. But that's way too slow. And black has to play king f8 here. Has to prevent rook e7. My opponent played f5, and after rook e7, not only is it winning for white, but there's actually no more counterplay because knight f3, knight g5 is coming. And this is a tempo on the bishop. If you play bishop d6, then I can go rook e6 and just start moving my pawn. So she played rook c8, I went knight f3, a5, and now knight g5, a nice tactical move. If you play bishop d8, it's mate, so you're not winning a piece. If you play king f8, you're completely losing because I take and win with a simple fork. So after knight g5, she started thinking. I think she'd missed that bishop d8 hangs mate. And after a long think, she just played a4. And I just took the pawn. I mean, why wouldn't I take the pawn? Then she played bishop d6. I don't really want to allow... Let me show you why... yeah, on bishop d6, I don't want to allow the bishop into e5. That's the only thing I don't want to allow. So I played rook e6. And if the bishop isn't coming to e5, an alternative was, of course, rook a7, bishop e5, knight e6, and then the bishop is defending g7, which I didn't like. So rook e6. And here she just played h6, and this is a losing rook endgame, of course, because I just queen my a pawn. I don't think there's a way to stop my a pawn from queening. I played a5, she played f4, a6, rook f8, a7, f3 check, but all of that is irrelevant. I'm gonna go rook b6 and rook b8, or if rook a8, I go rook b6 and rook a8. So king f2, g4, rook b6, rook e8, and rook b8 was the final move of the game. Here my opponent resigned. I'm not sure how good this game was. I'm sure you guys will engine check it, but please don't spoil it for me in the comments. I want to learn from this game. This tournament I will be showing you games that I haven't checked with the engine because obviously I don't have time to analyze. Round 2 starts in an hour and 10 minutes, so wish me luck. There are 20 live boards, so if I'm playing on board 1 through 20, one of them you can actually watch the game live. I'm not sure what the site is, but the tournament is Dubrovnik Advent Open, so I'm sure you guys can find it. Anyway, thank you. Excuse the bad lighting, bad sound, everything. I'm in a hotel room. I cannot do anything. See you with round 2 tomorrow. Bye bye.